to Two Tall Guys Talking Sales. I'm your host for this session. I'm Sean.
And I'm Kevin.
And together we're going to talk about a unique problem that you might be having in your sales process in your sales world. This 15 minutes is designed for salespeople, sales managers, and CEOs of the company that are trying to increase their revenue and trying to be more productive in your sales processes. So let's get started.
Welcome back to Tall Guys Talking Sales. Today we're going to hammer on the idea of, does your organization hold salespeople accountable for a lack of performance? Now, before anybody says, oh, this is all doom and gloom, we want to preface this by saying, hey, we're under the impression and assumption that no leader of good people wants anyone to be surprised if there's a change in their employment status, right? Nobody should ever be surprised that they're getting let go, right? That should be a non-starter.
That should be a non-starter.
Yeah, good.
So let's talk about that a little bit as well. So we're having communications that salesperson knows that they're not performing to expectations. The expectations have been previously assigned and they're realistic expectations.
There's a good one.
Yeah. So we're going through that process, and now we've had conversations, so they're not surprised. So what do we do then? So we're having problems. They're not performing. Maybe it's because of a lack of skills problem. Maybe it's because of a lack of motivation problem. Let's just assume that's a lack of skills problem, right? They just don't know how to move forward.
Good. I tell you what, if I was an instrument, you just plug the string that said teaching and development, man. You hit it well. I love coaching people in a sales role because that allows me to spread my wings and say, okay, are we going to talk strategy, skills, tactics, or in a lot of cases, it's just behaviors. Are you doing the behaviors that drive success? Working in small businesses owners are distracted, right? So sometimes they don't do all the things to run their business well, right? It's not an error of malicious intent. It's an error of omission. An example in the marketing world would be, hey, all I did was email people. I never picked up the phone, right? If you're just so focused on one thing, salespeople can do that too. They can just be so focused on their one key account that they never prospect anybody else because they were fearful of losing that really key marquee account for the company, right? But if they're not doing those behaviors, and it's up to us, to Sean, for you and I to go put our arms around those folks and say, hey, look, there's a better way, and we can help you see the light, but you've got to be open to that change.
Absolutely. And I do want to say, since we recorded our last episode, got a little feedback offline. We're not saying that we are the only solution to the problem. In fact, the reason that you and I are doing this podcast is we're trying to explain to people how to solve the problem themselves. If they can't figure it out, we're happy to help. But that we could very likely have the person that's responsible for sales management fix the problem. We don't have to be there. We're just trying to give some guidance on how to make that happen. So It's not about them having to hire us. But we do suggest that sales manager have a conversation with the salesperson and say, why aren't you being successful? And now we've had that conversation a couple times. Now we got to say, you need to change your behavior now because we're holding you accountable for that lack of performance. Mm-hmm. You are not doing it. I like to tell salespeople, look, our job is to employ the rest of the company. The reason that we get paid as salespeople is because we bring in revenue that not just pays for us, not just pays for our income, our overhead, our benefits, but it pays for everybody else's as well. And that is our job. Everybody else's job is to do something else in the company. Our job is to make them get paid and help them get paid. And if we aren't bringing enough revenue, then the company can't survive. Just as simple as that.
And I love that setup because when our preface here, the question is, does the organization hold salespeople accountable when underperforming? So let's break this into chunks, right? Because if we say it's everybody or nothing, right, the topic and the subject matter gets too convoluted. So let's talk about how does an organization on a peer-to-peer level hold each other accountable? Sean, I bet you've worked in a number of organizations where you get to look at your peers and say, hey, we all get incentivized if we all win, right? So that's one accountability metric is on the paycheck, right? You got a shared goal. But let's talk about some of the less obvious ones. Some of the things around maybe product releases, shared joint sales calls, some of those things.
Sure. Right. So I don't know the right metric. I think maybe you do, Kevin. If you don't remember it, that's fine because I'm kind of springing this on you cold. But like, did the sales manager make side by side, riding the shotgun, going to see customers, doing a little windshield time to go see to joint calls with the salesperson that's not performing?
Oh
So,
yeah. That was like
right.
80% of
Yeah.
sales managers haven't ridden with their sales reps in the past 2 years.
Yeah,
Maybe it's
it's
even
so
3 years.
yeah, it's just a really really bad number. I thought you might remember the number because I thought you mentioned it the other day, but the reality is that's just atrocious, right? That may not be a salesperson's problem, it may be a sales manager's fault, right?
Mhm.
And I do like to say that eagles like to flock with eagles, doves like to flock with doves, pigeons flock with pigeons, right? So
There's a
um,
turkey analogy in there somewhere.
if there's a turkey analogy in there somewhere. Um, the reality is that if you have a really really good salesperson, then that should bring everybody else up because now they should be trying to flock with that eagle. Um, Otherwise, that eagle is going to get frustrated because he's pulling the load for the entire company, and we
Mhm.
can't get good things to happen here because the rest of the sales guys aren't performing the way they need to.
Yeah, yeah. And for holding, a team accountable, holding a person accountable in a team, you're just thinking through the um, if somebody's underperforming, uh, why? It's an easy question for me to sit back and armchair quarterback this, but as a leader in any organization, you have to lean across the table and go, what's really going on? What resources do you not have? Putting the onus out there like, hey, tell me why or tell me how I can help you win and tell me why you're not winning now. And let's work through these details because at the end of the day, I love your phrase, Sean, the rising tide lifts all ships. Like the rising tide is rising revenue and it
Right.
lifts everything else. You build budgets when you build revenue. You want a bigger IT budget? So we got to sell more. We want new capital equipment. We really need to sell more so we can fund that or shorten the
Right.
long time on that. Everything can come back to a sales being a bigger part of the solution. So,
Yeah. And the holding each other accountable goes to just showing up for work on time, right? And being there and doing the work you have to do. And sure, we have issues that come up in our personal lives. Kids need to go to the doctors, school events, whatever the case may be. But the expectation among the sales team that you're doing everything you possibly can to get this to happen, and I'm doing everything I possibly can to make it happen as well if I'm another salesperson. I think that's the hold accountable as well for performance because I expect that my peers are going to work hard. I'm going to work hard. And, if there's still problems after that, then we can have those conversations. But let's just make sure that we're all showing up and doing the job as well as we possibly can.
yeah. So for the operations professionals and engineers out there that may not have a ton of sales exposure, if you're watching this remotely or after the fact, um, I think it's probably useful for us, Sean and I, to talk about two things. One, expectations versus reality, but also what does a healthy sales culture look like from an outsider looking in, right? How can people see that you have a healthy sales culture that not only lifts up the people who are underperforming, but high fives when there's a success or victory? Sean, any steering thoughts there?
Yeah. So if everybody is in the same building, which is a nice way to have it if you're a small business, um, that culture of we brought in a order, let's celebrate. I wrote about this in my book. You can see the cover of it roll over my shoulder here. Um, I am a firm believer that little wins along the way need to be celebrated and people need to get credit for those things. So holding people responsible for their performance goes both ways. You reward those people that are doing the good things. So you create little incentives along the way. That also kind of points out the people that aren't performing because they're not getting those little wins. This is a little bit to what you were saying at the beginning of the show when you said it should not be a surprise, right? So if we see that Jerry is never getting rep of the week, is never getting the new order of the week, the big order of the week, or whatever that little metric, little contest is, that's a signal to everybody, including Jerry. Hey, it's time for you to step up. And what's going wrong, right? And you need to voice your opinion. And it can't be about, well, I don't have as good of accounts. I don't have as this. I don't have that. It could be, but don't let it be an excuse. Let it be, can you help me get this? Can you help me get this? As opposed to, I don't have.
Yeah. Uh, in small businesses or small sales teams or sales organizations, I like to paint the analogy of, if there's a fire in the kitchen, everybody grabs a bucket, right? So when you want to see your teammates win, they also want to see you win. That kind of sales culture is really healthy. So I know we set this up by talking about what do you do when someone's underperforming, and often the behaviors of those around them when they're underperforming, if the underperformer is being shunned, set in the corner, or people are kind of, it's kind of like getting the yips, right? The person is ostracized. That is the unhealthy sales culture. That's where there's backstabbing and this kind of things. Those are cultural things that have to get rooted out quickly by leadership. But for the outsiders looking in that says, hey, what does the sales culture look like? When you see somebody, high-fiving somebody for, hey, thanks for flipping me that lead. They were a better match for my personality. Hey, this was a better fit for this customer sales service team because they were, have more experience. Or, hey, this was a good greenfield option for us because we have a new type of customer, new product offering. Pitching in is a good sign of a healthy sales culture. So when we talk about looking for people being held accountable for poor performance, I often like to also look for what does good performance look like. Now,
Absolutely.
the fun topic that you and I were talking about offline was the expectations versus reality. So dig in on that. That was a fun topic for us.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. So a lot of times, the rest of the organization doesn't understand how difficult sales is. Um, Sales is one of the hardest professions out there. And unfortunately, most salespeople don't get trained adequately when they are young people. They learn their job on the job. Just fact of life, right? There's only 80 some universities that offer a bachelor's degree, be a BA or BS in sales. Most salespeople, when they were growing up, when they were going to school, when they're going to secondary school, when they're in the military, whatever they did to after they got out of high school, they did not think, I'm going to be a sales guy. That's my dream. So sometimes the expectation is, well, they're just going to come in and make it rain, to steal a really bad terminology that I just don't like. But the reality is do they actually have the skills to do that? So underperforming salespeople, does the organization have the expectation that they're going to be fantastic on day one? Maybe that's an unrealistic expectation. And let's work with the organization so that everybody can be expected to win and has the tools to win and be successful.
I think that if we said nothing else, that would be the punctuation point, right? You could say that having the right expectations to win, exclamation point, drop the mic.
Yeah.
But what that looks like in reality, right? You come into a sales organization as a VP of sales, a salesperson, a BDR, and you get there and you are saddled with this idea that there's sales enablement, there's tools, there's collateral, artifacts, scripts, sequences of things, right, that drive success in the sales arena. And you've got a quota that matches that, and then you realize that once you get into your pipeline that there hasn't been business development in a year, 6 months. There's been no digital selling for 6 months, a year, 2 years. And you realize that you're really playing from a rear position, not a forward position. So that kind of expectation management becomes really key. Kind of like time management. Sean, I'm looking at our clock here and I just ran us out of time, man. I'm sorry.
I think it's time for us to wrap up. I have a feeling we're going to be talking about this subject in a future episode. And I really do hope people come back and enjoy it. But for now, I think we have to be done.
Nah, thanks, Sean. Thanks for joining us again for this episode of Two Tall Guys Talking Sales. Don't forget to tune in next week where we'll tackle your next issue. If you've got a question between now and then, drop it in the comments and we'll try to address it on our next podcast. Happy selling.